very clever to paint the ceiling. Next slide. And then the fun begins. So this is one of their scenes in the show. Scary. Maybe this was the Halloween version.
Would you like us to try Halloween Small World?
So the next one, next slide. Maybe there are maintenance issues too. Next slide. This was very fun. This was some interaction in the show. It went into the spillway. Very clever. Points for that. And then some character introduction. This was the first time we saw some characters. It looks like Brer Bear off on the left. And the next slide, there were mutant turtles in here. These are the Power Rangers in Small World.
Are they Marvel?
Yeah. Cool, we can sit them down. So there was some concern because this wasn't the only part that had done Small World. A couple others had done Small World too. There are actually several dozen decent theme parks in China. So when we were doing the menu for Hong Kong Disneyland, we scratched our heads and said, let's wait a little bit before we do Small World to get a better sense of whether it's played out or whether it has a reputation or not. And so we did. We waited. And as we got further into it and as we began to build the park and we're near opening, we realized that this was probably an overreaction. This park gets maybe 1 million people a year, but the ride itself, we calculated based on what we saw in a weekend going through there, maybe 10,000 or 20,000 people a year might go on this attraction out of 1.6 billion people, so what are we worried about?
What are you worried about when you look at it?
That's true. That's true. So next slide. So then right after opening Hong Kong Disneyland, it was the most requested attraction, whereas it's a small world.
It wasn't there on opening day, so it means that everybody was saying, why isn't it here? So
that's right.
Yeah.
So we quickly began our exploration into what It's a Small World would be like for Hong Kong. And next slide, we decided, well, first of all, we had another weather issue compounded. It was part of the Paris problem of gray skies many days of the year, and also acid rain. So anything that is white out there, white structures, white buildings, will eventually get etched by the acid rain and get lots of black streaks that are manageable on Space Mountain because it's kind of easy. It's kind of self-cleans itself whenever it rains, but with all of the nooks and crannies on It's a Small World, it was really looked to be a challenge. So we again went with a colored facade that was influenced by the fact that it's set against green mountains. And so Katie Olson did the color palette for this, did an amazing job of adjusting things and getting a unique look for it. I wanted just to say, because this is really weird, this entire facade in Hong Kong is made out of aluminum, or aluminium, as they call it out there. It's all made out of metal. And we have 3 types of paint, there's chunky and extra chunky and fine chunks. It's like cottage cheese. The next slide shows the finished product there. Rather nice packaging.
And a blue sky. How did you arrange that?
And it was ball weather that day. So the next slide. The other main thing that we decided to do was to go back to a canal versus a flooded. And this is something, you ask 100 people, 50 like flooded, 50 like the canal. We liked the canal because it allowed us to bring the sets in a little bit closer to make the show feel a little bit more immersive. And I think there's something else about it, which is that it gives it a really graphic quality, or it gives it a graphic crispness. Almost as if you are riding through a storybook illustration rather than going for a realistic approach, which is what the flooded, in my opinion, does. So we decided to go with the canal, and going with the canal required that we went back to the original 1964 World's Fair designs and drawings so that all the sets could fit around the canal. They're all, they're on stand-ups on raised platforms, unlike the other small worlds which are flooded. So we went back to the New York World's Fair drawings, which was interesting because they were signed and drawn by and signed by Claude Coates and Mark and a whole host of wonderful legends. And it was great to see those And so the next slide. The other thing that we wanted to do before we got into the whole character discussion was amp up the special effects a little bit and the lighting. Just juice it up, make something really interesting for 10-year-old boys who are going on the ride to focus on and look at. The effects in Small World are very clever, mostly optical, simple optical illusions that are delightful, that look magical. And so we added several of those, and we did some projection effects like what you see there on the snowflakes. Every sun in every scene has an effect on it. So that aurora borealis in South America seems to change and shimmer, and so we just wanted to have one little kind of wink effect on each of the suns. Okay, next. And the rainforest, we just thought it'd be fun to make it a black light scene, so we made it a black light scene. Some of these don't have any explanation other than, wouldn't it be cool if you went, from kind of a light control situation before you go to the finale and then really be dazzled by the finale. We changed the color palette a little bit in there from what we had done previously, made it a little sunnier. And then there's this polarization effect that we added to the scene. So that some of the daisies and some of the patterns and triangles and geometric patterns shift as you ride through, like you see happening quickly on that upper one, and slower on the bottom. Maybe I'm going too long. So anyway, we'll go to the next slide. Oh, one more thing on the rainforest. This is fun. We added, you don't have to go back, but we added some blinking eyes. We have this great special effect of dimensional blinking eyes. So we added some of those in the background as you're riding through that. It was also important to really finally, give the Asia scene the size and the importance that it requires, since it's going in Asia. And we really weren't representing, other than through costume and the other shows, weren't focusing too much on Korea, Philippines, Cambodia, places like that. So we made sure that all of those Asian regions and Asian countries were represented, but especially mainland China, which has some really great iconography, and Hong Kong, which was the locale of this park. So that's what we did. The next slide shows the finished product of that. And we have some Chinese lanterns in there in the back just as you exit the scene. That makes it kind of fun. And the next slide, I can't remember what's coming up next, but we'll find out. So this brings us to the character discussion. In Hong Kong, this had been an idea that had been kicked around for probably 10 years, I think. It's been proposed for Disneyland and Walt Disney World and maybe even for Tokyo. And we're kind of waiting, we'll be the first park to take this on. And so we decided to take it on because it was the right location to do this idea. There arguably was not enough opportunity to introduce characters in Hong Kong Disneyland, not as much as we would like to, with a limited attraction menu. So through parades and things like that, we try to introduce as many characters as we can. And synergy is two ways. So there's, the one way is to show people in the park what it is they know and love, but the other way is to introduce people, to something new that they may not be aware of. When I'm growing up at Disneyland, I had seen some of the Disney films, but I hadn't seen, they were only released every 7 years. So this Disneyland was my way of going, oh wow, maybe I should go, I'd like to see Snow White. The ride's really great. Maybe the movie's good.